Good afternoon and welcome to the second annual web-based Academic Vision for Excellence seminars, also known as WAVES, which is hosted by the Wyoming Department of Education, Special Education Programs Division. We are appreciative of your time and effort to learn from our local and national presenters on important topics that impact us, educators, students, families, and our state. I am Susan Shipley, and I will be your moderator today. We encourage you to participate and ask questions through the chat box. There will also be some time at the end if you would like to unmute yourself and ask some questions. Presentation recordings and materials will be available to you at the Wyoming Instructional Network for the remainder of the school year. Watch for the link to be provided in the chat box for this session. Please note there has been a change in obtaining PTSB and STARS credit. There will be a WAVES Summer Fall PTSB form emailed to all registered participants, which will list all the sessions from August to November. Participants will be responsible for tracking their own hours of attendance for the WAVES conference, and for the summer fall, you will only submit one PTSB form after the final session on November 9th. The submission deadline is December 15th for all the summer fall WAVES sessions. No forms can be accepted after the 15th of December. PTSB credit will be submitted by WDE once attendance has been verified. There will be a separate PTSB form for the winter spring sessions, which will begin January and end in May. So if you have questions about the STARS credit, please contact Jennifer Duncan. Jennifer Duncan at Jennifer.Duncan@wyoming.gov, WYO.gov. At the end of the session, please fill out an evaluation for this session. Your feedback is very valuable and helps us drive the planning for future webinars and events. The link will be posted in the chat box. The link will also be included in a follow-up email you will receive in 24 hours. When you submit your evaluation, you will be entered into a drawing to win a prize for your school or classroom. Today, the prize is The Adventures of the Pirates of Pondering, a collection of 8 stories that is part of a resource kit designed to help 3 to 7-year-old children develop early thinking skills and concepts by Dr. Dunstan. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Julie Dunstan. Dr. Dunstan has worked for more than 3 decades in both early childhood and learning related settings. She has conducted policy research on child development, family needs, addictions, learning differences, and general education. She has served on numerous policy bodies, advisory boards, and governmental commissions. Julie has been the driving force in the development of innovative programs, including the ICANN program for children with math-related difficulties and the iPlay program, which promotes phonological skills in preschools. Most recently, she retired as the Reading Clinic's executive director to spearhead the Reflex Ions in an initiative designed to develop flexible mindsets of self-directed learning. The Reflex Ions team conducts longitudinal research on emerging executive functioning processes and related learning. The team also has created resources for families, schools, including children and stories, with guides for educators. Julie believes all learners can develop a sense of competence and be adaptive in responding to complex and ever-changing world. So please help me welcome Dr. Dunst.
Thank you, Susan, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for giving your time today. I can only imagine after a full day of teaching how you're going to attend and focus on our work this evening or this afternoon for you. I'm in Bermuda, so it's evening for me. So I encourage you to engage and to ask questions as we go along. Caitlin's going to interrupt me when she sees anything that I need to address. So today we're going to talk about executive function, flexible mindsets, and reducing stress. And our emphasis today is early childhood. I want to thank the teams at ILD and Research ILD, Dr. Lynn Meltzer, who is the founder and head of both institutes, was my mentor. I dread to say how long ago, but certainly more than 30 years. She has been an inspiration, and her team is just one of the best teams I've ever worked with. If you want dedication and professionalism, these are the places to go. So I thank Dr. Meltzer and the whole team for partnering with me on this and allowing me to bring this to you in Wyoming. So we're going to start out with a poll. I'm going to stop my share, and Caitlin is going to launch a poll for us.
Great, thank you, Julie. So in the chat, everybody should see the link to our first poll. So I'll give everybody a second to start filling that out, and then we can watch our responses come in. So as we wait, I'll quickly run through the questions. So the first question is, today's children are experiencing more stress and trauma than their counterparts 25 years ago. Question 2, today's teachers end up with much of the responsibility for building social emotional learning competencies. Question 3, teaching executive function strategies in early childhood can help children learn how to learn. And the last question, building EF processes early can help to mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences. So as you can see, we have 18 responses so far. So about 85% of people say that children today are definitely experiencing more stress and trauma than their counterparts 25 years ago. And same for question 2. 95.2% say definitely teachers are ending up with much of the responsibility for building SEL competencies. And similarly here for question 3, teaching EF strategies in early childhood can help children learn how to learn. We have 92.7% say definitely. And building EF processes early can help to mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences. About 90% say definitely, and about 11% say sort of. So thank you to everyone for responding. We have so many responses come in, almost 70. So thank you. Anything else on that you'd like to comment on this, Julie? If not, I can.
I would just like to say that, I'm sure many of the audience this afternoon are early childhood educators. And so I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but these questions are answered this way consistently across all kinds of audiences that we work with. And so I know the early childhood educators of all people know the importance of these early years, and that there's a lot more complexity in what we're doing and a lot more responsibility. So thank you for contributing to that. So I can go back to sharing my screen, screening my share.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Julie Dunstan. Please call me Julie. I have worn all kinds of hats throughout my career, but I think the ones that are most pertinent this evening are the time that I spent in early childhood and learning differences and executive function. So some years ago, our team started to look at the concerns for today's children. They're going to face unprecedented challenges, climate change, social injustices, pandemics, but they're also going to have opportunities from fields like bioengineering, nanotechnology, and there are a lot of fields that the children we're teaching right now, they'll have jobs that we can't imagine right now. So when we think about how to prepare them, we know that we have to give them some very basic skills, but we cannot teach them every single skill they're going to need for the complexity of the world that they're going to work in. So we started to talk more about capacities, and we decided that we would build flexible mindsets, that we would give learners, whether it's teachers, children, parents, the tools they need to respond resiliently and adaptively, because we know they're going to face adversity. We know there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the world. And today we're going to talk about stress in the brain. So you're going to meet Jelani, a student, and get an insight into his journey. We're going to review quickly definitions of executive function processes. I know that you've been looking at this throughout the whole series, but we'll just have a quick look at how we do it in early childhood. We'll talk about building trusting relationships, particularly by addressing mistakes, mishaps, and misconceptions, and also in using strategy-based feedback. So let's start out talking about the brain. What was our brain designed for? Was it designed for planning and monitoring and thinking? Well, 10,000 years ago, our brain had two jobs: surveillance and alert. There was not much thinking involved, and there's a good reason for that, because 10,000 years ago, if you see someone running like crazy past you and you stop to think, you probably ended up being someone's dinner. So we have to remember that our own brains and the brains of the children that we work with actually weren't designed to do what we ask everyone to do every day in today's society. So John Rady talks about anxiety. He says anxiety is fear. Fear is the memory of danger. So when something has happened to us that has been adverse or traumatic, our brain remembers and tries to avoid that at any cost. So when we're preparing our brains and the brains of our children to learn, we have to remember that there's a certain amount of stress that is actually good for learning. Because if our brain is too inactive, then it's not alert and it's not going to be open to learning new things. I'm sure all of you have students in your class right now who get anxious, who get fearful, who might shut down, who get angry. And so, as we mentioned in our poll, these social emotional learning competencies become part of what teachers have to deal with, what professionals have to deal with, and trying to keep all of your students in a place where they're only confused enough to be curious, when they're being playful, when they have just a bit of frustration that's going to stretch them. That's a hard job for teachers to do. So I want to introduce you to Jelani, and a quote by John Holt. Some of you may have read his book, How Children Fail, which was written the year after I was born. And so it's been around for a while. He says, when children are very young, they have natural curiosities about the world and explore them, trying diligently to find out what is real. And those of you in early childhood, you know these children come in our doors and they are ready for exploration, and they're active and curious and want to figure out what's going on. Now, in a lot of cases, John Holt says, as they become producers, They fall away from exploration and start fishing around for the right answers with little thought. They believe they must always be right. They believe the only good response from the teacher is yes, and that no is a defeat. So what happens to Jelani's brain as he has these experiences? Well, he has a lot of worry and frustration. He feels like he's done things wrong. And this causes the amygdala to absolutely flood the body with cortisol, putting you into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. That's not going to be a good learning mode if your brain is being affected by pumping hormones. And so the prefrontal cortex becomes hijacked, and you're not really able to think and learn clearly. And those of you who are familiar with the work from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, you will know that this actually can impact the architecture of the brain. And so what happens to Jelani by the time he's in middle school? Little explanation needed there. Again, I think we all have known someone who this is their experience going to school. And so we worked on the flexible mindsets model for a number of years, and we have 3 key components. Metacognition, you'll all be very familiar with the idea of thinking about thinking. The executive function processes that you've been learning about in the other workshops, and then the mindset messages. This builds off of the work of Carol Dweck and her colleagues on growth mindsets. So we have a slightly different definition of executive function processes. We say that they're the tools we use when we identify a goal, use what we know to figure out what to do and make it happen. We have 6. I'm going to take you through them very quickly because I know that you've already had some background in this area. So you'll be familiar with the work of ILD and Research ILD and their SMARTS program. And so what we said to ourselves at Reflections, we said, well, what can we do for early childhood? And we, as mentioned before, we developed these books and some other resources for teachers. And we've been using these materials in classrooms for the past several years. And you don't need these. You can do a lot of this work as you are, because early childhood educators and educators in general have a lot of good strategies for teaching executive function processes. But I'm going to take you through our stuff. We start with goal setting so that a 5-year-old can understand it. A goal is something we want to get done. And a plan is the steps we take to reach that goal. And we organize our things, we organize our ideas so that we can find things to keep us safe and to keep things from getting broken. Because again, when you're 5, that is kind of executive function, right? Now, self-monitoring is, you'll often hear the term inhibition in early childhood. And most definitions will talk about keeping on track, monitoring your thoughts, monitoring your strategies, monitoring your progress towards a goal. In our framework, we talk about how self-monitoring is really about how you evaluate your learning, and then it works together with flexible thinking and calibrate your actions. So in a nutshell, we need you to evaluate and calibrate. We need you to change in response to what you've heard or seen or felt. So that is how we talk about self-monitoring with 4- and 5-year-olds. Now, I want you to do something very quickly right now. I'm going to read you some letters. I don't want you to use a paper and pencil. I don't want you to type anything out. I want you to simply do this activity, and when you've finished, put the answer in the chat bar. So here's what you're going to do. Listen to this. Q, L, G, V, K. All right, now put those letters in order, alphabetical order, in the chat bar. Okay. Now put them in alphabetical order in the chat bar. Okay, so the reason we use this example is to try to capture in a snapshot the notion of working memory. And when you think about most complex tasks that we do, we need to have information, hold it in our head, and juggle it, move things around. And sometimes we take that for granted, but other times it's quite the mental effort to be able to use your working memory. So we use, the definition of it being the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information. And it's so we can either store it in long-term memory, solve a problem, or produce something. And so we know that you're not going to explain to young children that this is what working memory is, but there are some fun activities you can do with them that will help them to get a sense of, oh, so many things to think about and do. I have too much on my plate, those sort of more simple manifestations of working memory challenges. And this is what we tell them. It helps us to remember things in our heads. And thinking flexibly, as you may have imagined by now, is the cornerstone of the work that Reflections does. It's not just, one way or the other way. It's how to use things in a different way. Oh, this broke. What else can we use to fix it? And thinking of different ways to solve a problem. So this is one of we call them puzzles at Reflections, not problems, but puzzles, problems, whatever you're comfortable with. We give this scenario to the children and we say, oh, what's happening here? What's the puzzle? And then we say, what could they do? What could they do to solve this? And then, what else could we try? So again, just in the chat bar, I want you to imagine what 4- and 5-year-olds would say if we said, oh, look, they're fighting over the teddy. What could they try? Put a few examples in there. You have a lot of young, bright sparks that you know. Take turns is fabulous. What else? Set a timer so they have times with that. Something's happened to my computer, but that's fine. Get another bear, share, take turns, play together. Rock, paper, scissors is great. Tell the teacher, talk to each other, ask for help. Look at all these wonderful things that young children can come up with. My favorite one by far is the tell daddy to go and buy another one so we can each have our own bear. It's pretty sophisticated for a young child. So we use a lot of imaginary play to develop executive function, and we set up a puzzle or a mistake in advance. So in this case, something was missing from the grocery list that was on the grocery list. It's missing from the shelves. And so one child says, oh, we could just not buy the strawberries. And the other one says, well, let's get a banana instead of the strawberries. And then, let's look somewhere else. Maybe they've just been moved. Let's look. They get everyone to look, and eventually the puzzle is solved. The reason we do this in imaginary play is because that is where children are able to work just a little bit beyond their current competencies. There's been a lot of research and investigations. There's a great research article called What Would Batman Do? But essentially, children can solve problems in character at a higher level than just when they're just in their everyday setting. And so that's why we use imaginary play a lot. So I want to share an anecdote with you. This is our poster child for flexible mindsets in early childhood. So I was visiting one of the preschools that we've been doing a lot of work with. And I was talking to the head of the preschool. Her name is Charisse Rayner. And she kept kind of squeezing her arms and stretching. And doing all kinds of things. So I said, oh, I said, did you have a real workout at the gym today? And she said, no, let me share with you what happened. So she'd been out in the playground with a bunch of children, and they were exploring the properties of various materials, and they had had some foam dice, and they had gotten stuck up in a tree. So Ms. Rayner says, oh, she says, look, it's a puzzle. What can we do? And so one child says, oh, well, you can get a ladder. So instead of her defaulting to the what else could we try, she thought that seemed like a good solution. So she turned around to go and get the step ladder. And as she did so, this little girl put her hands on her hips and said, Miss Rayner, be flexible. You could hold me up and I could get the dice. And so, of course, she felt she needed to reinforce that. So that's why her arms hurt, because she'd been walking all around with this 5-year-old holding her up to try and get them out of the trees. Okay, it's time for our second poll now. So I'm going to stop my share, and Caitlin's going to take us through that.
Great. So I am putting the second poll in the chat right now. We'll give folks a second to get that started while I share my screen here. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. Here it is. Okay, so we have a couple of responses so far, and 100%, well now 2/3 of folks would be terrified to host a webinar, and it is very much would make everyone feel very anxious. So more on the anxious and terrified side than relaxed and energized, that's for sure, for question number 1. And for question 2, presenting at a school staff meeting. Similar split here, mostly, so 60% said anxious, a small portion said terrified, but about 20% would feel relaxed presenting at a school staff meeting, and about 20% would feel energized by that as well. Ooh, jumping from an Olympic height diving board would terrify 63.3% of folks here. Yep. And then for the last question, for this question, taking a pop quiz on algebra and geometry, over half say that's would make them pretty anxious, and 33% said terrified, but a small portion said relaxed and energized. And for this last question, almost all respondents would feel either terrified or anxious on that end of the spectrum for presenting on stage at an international conference to an audience of hundreds of professionals. A very small percentage, about 5.5%, said that would make them feel energized, but the majority would not feel that way. Thank you everyone for responding. We got a lot of responses here.
We did, thank you. And I ask those questions as we begin to examine things about comfort level and what is comfortable in a particular environment. And we have found that, oh, great. Yes. So what we found is that reducing stress is almost entirely about creating environments where everyone feels comfortable to ask questions, make mistakes, and take risks for learning. If you feel emotionally safe, you will be more likely to take a risk for learning. So what we've come up with is that essentially reducing stress means building trusting relationships, and no one can do that better than early childhood educators. I tell you, those little ones come in and, you know, we come to visit the classroom and everyone is so happy and having fun and engaged in learning. I think if all education could look like an early childhood classroom, I think we'd be in a lot better shape. So in our book, we talk about 4 ways to build trusting relationships. Obviously, today, we do not have a lot of time. So the 2 we're going to focus on today are mistakes, mishaps, and misconceptions, and strategy-based feedback. Great. So I'm going to share a little bit of brain science with you. You don't have to understand this on a scientific level, but I've put the information there for those of you who do like to have it. This is a study where college students were given electroencephalographic evaluations. And if you look at the green line, you will see that that is where students are not making mistakes. So if you're going along and you're doing just fine, there's not a whole lot of ups and downs in your hormone responses, in your chemical responses in the brain. However, if you make a mistake, then part of the electrical activity spikes in the brain, in the area of the brain where we're told, hey, look, you got to pay attention here. You have to be in control. So it's a self-monitoring part of the brain that receives a spike in electrical activity after we make a mistake. That's true for everybody when we make mistakes. Now, the interesting part about this study is that they gave these college students a theory of intelligence scale. And you may be familiar with this based on growth and fixed mindsets. And what they found was if you have a growth mindset, then after you make a mistake, you'll be more likely to pay attention to your errors. And not only would you be more likely to pay attention to errors, you're going to make fewer errors. So when we think about the difference of those who are in a fixed mentality versus a growth mindset, there's a great advantage to brain functioning when we have a growth mindset. So what about teaching preschoolers about mistakes? I have rarely come across classrooms where teachers are already actively teaching what is mistake and what do we do when we make a mistake. If children do things that are poor choices, we give them a lot of instruction about what to do when it's not a mistake, but you actually did something you shouldn't have done. It was kind of conscious, right? So these are some preschoolers who were in one of the classrooms we worked with, where the kinds of mistakes they had were, oh, well, if you accidentally knock someone's food over, if you accidentally trip someone up, if you drop something. And the interesting part about this is coming up with multiple solutions. So being flexible, what could you do if this happened, if you made a mistake? And so as you turn the attention of the children, not to an issue of points or rewards and punishment, but to solutions, ways to problem solve these puzzles that come up as a result of a mistake, you reduce the level of anxiety in the classroom, because this is where we learn. Well, mistakes are something we do all the time. They're a part of everyday life, and we just find a solution. So it's very powerful to teach your children directly about what is and is not a mistake, and to brainstorm about solutions. And those of you who've used some of the early childhood curricula, you will find some pieces built in there about sort of social problem solving in essence. This is from one of our books, but you can take this from any storybook where anyone makes a mistake. And what you'll see, this one child has drawn a picture. The pig couldn't get out. Swabby was crying. And in the book, Swabby is crying because the pig is stuck in the porthole. And they had a plan to get the pig out. And so that, again, that's what this child is taking away from this learning situation. Then we know we're priming them to take risks for learning. We're going to talk a little bit about feedback now.
Mr. Findlay is an experienced teacher and an astute observer of children's skills and behaviors. Within the first week or two of school, he has spotted those children who will follow the rules, answer questions, and coast through the year. He has also identified those children who will struggle, seem confused, and, if pushed, may act out. As he delivers content, he often calls on DeVray, who always has the correct answer. Millie does not participate by choice, but there are times when Mr. Findlay calls on her. In these rare instances, Millie avoids as best she can, using playfulness and, if it comes to it, tears. Mr. Findlay's comments to DeVray are frequent yet brief. Great job, or brilliant, or I knew you'd get this. In Millie's case, Mr. Findlay's feedback is different. You can do it, keep on trying, or Gemma will help you.
Okay. So we're going to go through an activity now to unpack a little bit of that feedback from Mr. Findlay. I want you to think about what struck you as you listened to the story. Whoops, we're having fun with that. And to see if you can figure out what underlying assumptions Mr. Findlay has about these children and the ones that we in general in society tend to endorse as intelligent or not intelligent. So we're going to do a waterfall for this. And a waterfall basically means that you will put all your thoughts into the chat bar, but you won't hit enter. So you're just going to be typing them in there continuously. And when it's time for us to do the waterfall, we're all going to hit enter at the same time. So you're going to have a good bit of time to think about this. You're going to have 2 minutes. And I want you to just brainstorm, what are the messages he's sending? What is it that we in society assume about smart kids and not so smart kids? Okay, so take your time and we're going to start our 2 minutes now.
Julie, should I put you? Oh, perfect. The timer's not working. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I have it on my phone, so that's fine. And how are we doing overall, Caitlin, for time? How much time do we have left?
We have plenty of time. So you have about an hour and 20 left.
Great. Okay, we have about another 30 seconds to just put all our thoughts into that chat bar without hitting enter. Okay, I'm going to give us a 10-second countdown and then everyone can hit enter. Here we go. 10 seconds. As soon as I get myself sorted. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, enter. Whoop, and even had a okay. So let's take a look at what's in the chat bar. Oh, stop. So there's a whole lot of things going on here, aren't there? We're making some assumptions that some children are less smart. They don't have to try as hard or try to give the answer. We've got encouragement to the quiet student, but no feedback, no clear feedback. Excellent. Smart kids behave better. We do. We associate behavior with intelligence all the time. We are definitely rewarding when people get the correct answer, when they raise their hand, when they appear to be listening. This is from preschool all the way through university, right? The smart kid always has the answer, always the same answer, giving a message to some students, they don't know anything. The smart kids are the ones who follow the social rules. The more outgoing kids must be smarter because they answer a lot. What else do we have? We have a lot of great things in here, sure. Yeah, non-smart kids don't participate, and if they do, they'll be wrong. We think that smart kids will always be prepared, which you can be very smart, but have weak executive function, right? So you may not be prepared. We think it's okay to say brilliant to some children, but not others. And I know from my experience, I feel as if I have done this many times and that I'm still working on trying to modify my feedback so that I am not making unfair distinctions between children. And when we look at this from the point of view of mindsets, here are the messages that we most often tend to hear in schools. We hear that faster is smarter, that always being right is smarter, trying hard is not so smart, and asking questions is not smart. Oh, let me go with this again. Oh dear, I do apologize. Yeah. So the next thing, and this doesn't have to be a waterfall, I just want you to put some ideas in there. What are the messages we should be giving to children instead of these 4 that I have listed here, or instead of some of the things that you put into the chart? How can we change our feedback, and what are the messages we should be giving? So just take a couple minutes and put some ideas into the chat bar. Great. So there's quite a bit about normalizing mistakes and progress over perfection. What I see an awful lot of, though, and also we're seeing good things that we're all smart in our own ways. I see a lot of effort comments, trying harder, keep trying, you can do it, do your best. I love that you are a careful thinker. Faster equals smarter is one of the silliest assumptions we make. And some of the most intelligent kids I've ever met take a really long time to think deeply through a concept or a problem. So the idea of valuing careful thinkers and thoughtful problem solvers is fabulous. But let's unpack a little bit more this notion of effort. It reminds me of, there's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin comes up to Susie and asks her, what are you doing? And she's reading a chapter book, her textbook for school. And she says, well, I realized that I didn't understand everything. So she went back and she read the previous chapter, and now she's reading the current chapter. And of course, Calvin says to her, well, I used to think you were smart. So we have this notion that if it comes to you easily, then you're smart. But if it doesn't, you just have to keep trying, right? So effort is one of those really interesting pieces of feedback that we really have to work on when we think about students, particularly those who learn differently. So trying hard should be good for everyone, absolutely. But what could happen if we only focus on effort, if we keep telling someone to try hard? Have any of you ever felt you're tilting at windmills, that you keep just trying to pound away at the same thing over and over again and you're just not getting anywhere? That can be really frustrating. And so for some children, they may just give up because they're so exhausted from trying and trying and trying and still getting it wrong. And I know that happens to us as adults as well. So what kinds of things can we do when we change our feedback? And oh dear, one of the things we can do is to pair that effort, or we call it perseverance, to persevere and try something different. And this is the piece that is so key in a world that is uncertain, where we don't know future possibilities, and yet we're being asked to prepare children to be ready for those situations. And one of the best ways is to teach them, if something isn't working, try something new. So we just put those two things together when we're talking about our feedback. So we're going to do a little activity here. And you'll see on the left-hand column here are some messages that you might hear from some of your students. I've heard most of these, I think, sometime along the way. And I want you to think about what kinds of feedback we could give that would just change things up a little bit for these children. So let's look at the first one. This just isn't working. I give up. What's some feedback or message you could give to that child? Let's put a few ideas in the chat box. Look at it together. Love that. Try a different way. It's another way we could try it. Let's try it together. These are all things, particularly those in early childhood. You're already using these things. You're already, encouraging children to do this. Take a break is wonderful. Let's have a brain break. Our brains are tired. Let's have a brain break. Maybe we can figure this out together. Fabulous. So again, what else can we try, right? Yeah, and I see, have you tried? I don't know if you're familiar with the research in math by Warshauer and Associates, but they talk about what have you tried? And then what else can you try? So fabulous. I love it. Yes, point out what they're doing and then add a clue. What do we already know? Fabulous. Okay. Now, what about this is just too hard? It's too hard for me. I can't do this. It's too hard. You can say a lot of the same things that you've already said. What else could you say? What else could we add for a child? What part is making it hard? Beautiful. Identifying where one step at a time is fabulous. Excellent. Okay. And what did I say for that? Let's see what I said. Oh, what makes it hard for you? Yes, let's take it one step at a time. This is puzzling. It'll take longer and we'll need to try different things. So you're acknowledging it. It is hard. It is difficult. And yes, I love the breaking it down. What's one piece you can do? Fabulous. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we do have all those kids who get it right all the time and put their hand up and tump, 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 they get everything right all the time. So should we just leave them be? Because they're no trouble to us. One of the things we've noticed in our work is that sometimes the children who do get everything quickly and easily are the ones that fall apart at university. It's the first time they've had to really work hard and they have to be independent. And guess what? They have spent so much of their mental energy wrapping themselves up in this cloak of perfection. I'm smart. I can do this. It's no problem. It's easy. I don't have to study. And the first time they have a challenge, they freeze because they've never encountered this before. And then they think they're stupid as well. And so you actually, if you don't prepare the children who get everything easily, you're also disadvantaging them in terms of their mindset. And so what could we say to a child? Because, oh, this was easy. I got it right away. Can you help a peer understand? How can you mix it up a little bit, do it a different way? And what we've sort of come up with is things like, what can you do that will make you think harder? What can we explore? What your curiosity? What do you wonder about this? We use the word grapple a lot in our work because we want children to understand that we want you to grapple. We don't want you to get frustrated to the point of, giving up, but we do like for you to grapple and have your brain engaged and curious. Practice it in an imaginary situation, helping another child, extend your learning. That's right. If they're in sort of upper elementary, middle and beyond, extend your learning should be something that is a common phrase that they're hearing in the classroom. Excellent. Now, what about the I can't do this? I know we're kind of having a variation on a theme here. Yes, finding something that's challenging to them and support them at that time as well for the kids who get it easy. Yet, I can't do this yet. The power of yet, that is one of the most important gifts we can give children is you can't do this yet. What's one step we can start with? What can you try? I bet you can. I bet you can with some kind of strategy feedback. Again, what have you tried? What else can you try? How can I help? Is always good. Yeah. And then I'm not good at math. All I do is make mistakes. And you notice how in our poll that one of the things that caused anxiety and even feeling terrified was the pop quiz and the algebra and geometry. And I picked that one because that's one that scares me. And any of you who are familiar with the work of Jo Bowler, she's done a lot of work in math mindsets. And for some reason, math is one of those really scary subjects that a lot of people have math phobias. So what could you say to a child who has a math phobia? It's a tricky one. Yes, the analogy of crawling before you walk. You fall down a lot. We have to practice. Mistakes is how we learn. Excellent. So, yep, let's try a different way. We get smarter by learning from mistakes. Let's find what's missing. And I think you've given a lot of examples of that already. That's a good one. Pair the math phobia kid with the kid who finished so quickly that they hadn't really, dug deeply into the concept. Figure out a different way. I love the I wonder. I wonder is such a great phrase. Okay. So I want you to listen again to this next piece from about the same teacher, from Mr. Finley.
Now let's return to Mr.
My bad. Start again.
Now let's return to Mr. Finley's classroom. Our teacher is now calling on a wider range of students. When he calls on students like DeVray, he is asking appropriately challenging questions that encourage students to think critically, solve complex problems, and be creative. For students like Millie, he is asking questions about things that are directly related to each student's interests. His feedback to students is consistent and conveys confidence in all students to learn. He uses language such as, I noticed that you spent a lot of your time on your drawing. What helped you to think about the story? I see that you found your mistake with that puzzle piece and fixed it. What strategy did you use to get the right piece in the right place?
And so again, the naming of the strategies is really, really important and really helpful. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of work on the Jamboard. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to ask you to think a little bit about this notion of what a strategy is. And so when we think about strategies for learning, we are in a position where we have to help children understand what a strategy is. So if I were to say to you, what is 7 times 8? And you didn't know it automatically, and most of us now as adults, we know that automatically. But if you weren't to know that automatically, let's list in the chat bar a few different strategies that a student could use to come up with the answer to 7 times 8. How would you figure out 7 times 8? What strategies could you use? Good, yeah, manipulatives. 7 times 7 plus 7, start with the known, break it into smaller numbers. Skip counting, draw a picture, groups with manipulatives, arrays. You've got mnemonics after that. Once they understand the concept, you can do mnemonics. Perfect. So you've got all kinds of different strategies there. And in math, it's fairly easy to say to students, oh, we're going to look at some strategies today for doing different things, and to really say, oh, the number line is a strategy, your multiplication table is a strategy, your manipulatives, singing a song to remember. But when we think about a lot of other subjects or younger children, it can be a little bit difficult to draw their attention to the different strategies that different children are using and why they're important. Okay. So we're going to move on now to our Jamboard. I'm going to give you a little bit of instruction, and then Caitlin's going to walk you through that. So I want you to think about, this is just a brainstorm. It doesn't actually have to be something you're going to do tomorrow, but with that in mind, something that's practical and a good takeaway from this session, what might you try to teach your students about mistakes? What little twist might you have on reframing my feedback? I know for me, I have a problem with the younger ones with, I like the way you're doing X. And of course, that feeds into the child wants to please me as opposed to having their own accomplishments. So when we go into the Jamboard, Caitlin will show you, I've put a couple of examples up there already, but I would love to have you add a whole bunch more of examples to that. So I'm going to stop the share, and Caitlin's going to walk you through that.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie.
Sure.
So here is the Jamboard. So if anybody's having trouble accessing it, you can let me know in the chat, but I think we see about 20 or so people have joined so far. So what you can do is you can click on the sticky note, which is right over here in the left side. You can type your old phrase first, and then type in your new phrase and click save. Or you can write an idea for teaching your students about mistakes. So here's a great example. An old way is saying, I like the way you're using your inside voice. And a way to reframe that would be, thank you for using your inside voice. It helps us all to think clearly. And another example could be an older way of saying it could be, keep on trying, you can do it. And a new one would be framing it as, this is tricky. We've tried this piece here. I wonder what would happen if we tried a different one. And we've got another example here. So thinking of the old phrase, use your walking feet, please. We could reframe it as, we need to make sure everyone stays safe. What are some rules that help us do that? So feel free to click on the sticky note over here on this side, which brings up this screen. You can choose any color you'd like, type in your old way and a way you might reframe, and then feel free to go ahead and click save.
So we'll give you plenty of time for this, so don't feel you have to rush. We've got lots of time for you to really add a bunch more stickies to our Jamboard.
And just a quick reminder, so you can find right over here, this is where the sticky note icon is, right on the left, where you see the pen, the eraser, the arrow, sticky note. Go ahead and click on sticky note.
Seems to be limiting how many people can get in.
Unable to get in.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
So once you've put one thing up, it asks you to come out of the jam, and then that will allow others in. Never had that before. Too many users. Yeah. I suspect that many of you have done a lot of work with inquiry-based learning and growth mindsets. I see some really fabulous examples. You know, I like the way you're drawing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that, but how much more powerful to say, that's a really cool drawing, tell me about it. And there are also, there's so many great words for older children, intriguing, or I'm curious about, the I wonder. There's lots of different options. Fabulous. I like the way you tried to solve that math problem a new way. I noticed you tried one of our strategies. What is another strategy you could try? You can do this with young children. It's amazing. Yes, and we're always being told. How many times do we see don't or stop? And of course, flipping it around. Can you share with me how we might say that differently exactly? Yeah. Yeah, the social problem solving is so big. Instead of saying be nice, say please don't do that. You could say please. You could frame it into the positive about what you'd like to see the child doing as an alternative. Fabulous. And, again, with young children or children with learning differences and executive function challenges, we always, well, you could do this yesterday, right? Why aren't you able to do it today? And, the child doesn't know why they couldn't do it yesterday. So now you can say, how can I help you? Or ask a friend. Yeah, always saying that I like how you work together instead of a generic great work, excellent, brilliant. Those are reinforcing, but they're not specific. Whereas I like how you work together to make that building is fabulous. Yeah. Yes, I'm so proud of you. Again, kind of puts it back on the child to please you or to make you proud of them. But yes, you should feel so proud. You did it. You did it. I like how creative you were. Any of these specific types of feedback are fabulous. Yeah, I like that one. Let's make sure everyone's safe. Don't forget to tell your feet to walk. That's beautiful. There's no don't run in that. It's just beautiful. Yes, yeah. You rushed your work, you made a lot of mistakes. just find those moments when they took their time and really reinforce that strategy. Yes, great. So many wonderful pieces. And Caitlin, are we able to make this available? Can they come back into here once in case they want to share with each other or add some more? They'll still have the same link will work, right?
Yes, they can continue using the same link.
Fabulous. That's excellent. Okay. Right. I am going to, have you stop share and then I can go back to sharing. Wonderful. So I know that many of you are probably already doing so much of this work, but I hope that you were able to sort of add one little piece in there that you might do a little bit differently tomorrow or next week. Okay. So before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to leave lots of time for our Q&A and some of the other sort of laundry pieces. I want to leave you with one of my favorite poems, and this is made, I feel, for early childhood educators. Listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. And I think those of us who work in the early years, that's why we're here, is to do the work of possibilities. I just want to also quickly share with you some information about our book for teachers. It's already been mentioned that there's a children's storybook that has 8 stories in it about the Pirates of Pondering, which is our early childhood program. But we also have a book coming out for educators to use, Flexible Mindsets in Schools. And it has a big focus on critical thinking, complex problem solving, and creativity. And I know that many of you are interested in teaching those kinds of capacities more directly and in a more targeted manner. So you can pre-order the book. You can also send me your email or put your email in the chat bar, and then I can send a free chapter to you from the book when it comes out next month. We're going to have a free chapter that's available to folks so that they can take a look at it before they decide if they want to have that book or not. So feel free to contact me or put something in the chat bar. So I want to thank you for your time. And I also want to thank Research ILD and ILD again. I know that Donna Kincaid is the person that you would want to contact about any more information. And I just going to take 2 seconds. I shall be right. Okay, my apologies for the interruption. So if we want to open it up to any Q&A or any questions that have come along the way, please go ahead. I'm going to stop the share now. Great.
Great, thank you, Julie. So yes, everyone, please feel free to type your questions in the chat or raise your hand and you can come off mute and ask your question that way. To get us started, Julie, there's a question about kind of different type of flexibility. So thinking flexibly in terms of seeing the perspectives of classmates, and maybe you could just share a little bit about how you kind of show that to students, how you model maybe like the flexibility of a different solution for a problem, but then also having to, you know, think flexibly about what your friend is feeling, that kind of flexibility.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a lot of work that's been done on children who aren't able to take perspectives. And sometimes we think of that as only belonging to children who are on the autism spectrum. But the reality is that we all have parts of us that make it difficult for us to take perspectives of others. And so teaching it directly in the classroom is really important. And I know we already do this work by, taking a book and saying, you be this character and you be that character, and let's talk about it. Or for older children, you might take one author and another author and role play a conversation between them. It's really important to, as you're setting up an environment where everyone feels welcome and everyone can bring all of ourselves to learning, to make sure that you celebrate everybody's differences. But you will come across those children who get stuck in the mud. And it seems as if they cannot take the perspective, they cannot see it. And it's like anything else with teaching, you have to break that down into tiny pieces and give them strategies as to ways. And so your typical reflective listening, actively coaching children in how we do that. Actively teaching social problem solving. Many of the examples that came out through us in this workshop talked about, well, we could try this or we could try that. Well, Julie thinks this, but Caitlin thinks that. And just having a discussion around those things. And, we brought this up in early on in this session that, teachers aren't made to be counselors and psychologists. It's not our job. But so many children are coming into us without these social and emotional competencies. And so it does become a part of teaching directly. And the great thing about early childhood and children's books is that there are so many books that talk about celebrating others, about mistakes that you can really use to jumpstart. And really, the imaginary play, if you're with the young ones, so fabulous for that, because you can put yourself into any role in the world. And I know there was one student last year, or perhaps the year before, we had an imaginary play, and we were using the Pirates theme, but he decided that he was a spaceman going off to space, and he was not engaging with the other pirates because, he's going in outer space and saving the world, and he had rockets and lasers and all kinds of things going on, and there's the other ones on their ship, doing the ship crew thing. And so as a facilitator, we had to wiggle that around and get him, to come in from outer space, and how can he and the pirates save the world together? And it's hard work. It can be quite painstaking, but I think facilitated imaginary play for the young ones is really, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm still waiting on some more questions to come in. But I suppose maybe you could also maybe give a few examples of how teachers can model their own flexible thinking moments. Just some suggestions around that.
Absolutely. I think modeling it's part of, in our book, we talk about the cycle of reflective learning for educators. And one piece of that is the metacognitive piece. So we also have to learn about our own selves and our brains and the habits that we have that may be great or not so great in the classroom. And then we have to model. And sometimes it feels a bit stupid. Oh, look, Miss Julie dropped her whatever, and it feels forced and artificial. But the more you do it, the more that you will become more comfortable with it, and that your students will expect it. And if our children think that we're perfect, if they think that we don't make mistakes, how will we have them feel safe? If they don't realize adults make mistakes, then they're always going to be thinking about, is this the right answer or the wrong answer? Am I correct? Am I accurate? Whereas if I always use this one because I was forever losing my car keys, and I'm had a lot of life experience. I really should be able to keep track of my car keys, but I just kept losing them. And I tried all these different strategies, all the ones you read about in the executive function books and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, my father, he's not with us anymore, but he bought me one of those hooks that you clip onto your belt loops. Boom, done, fixed. But I will share with the children how many different strategies and what I did and all the mistakes Miss Julie made. And then I'll show them, and here's my little loop and my problem solved. So try something new and keep trying. That's the message when you're modeling, so that they see that, that, and simple things. Miss Julie was, we were going to read this book today, but such and such happened. And so I decided we're just going to play this math game instead. So they can see that it doesn't have to be perfect and that everyone has to chop and change sometimes. Because if we want to prepare them for an uncertain world, we know they need structure as their base to feel safe, but then they also need to know that around that, there will be mistakes and challenges and different ways of looking at things and different ways of solving problems.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat from Emily.
Yeah.
Do you have examples of phrases you can use to help kiddos that are not flexible and accepting your help?
So this being able to ask for help. This is one of those signs of those fixed mindsets, right? That if I ask for help, I must be stupid. And that is what a lot of children and adults think. Oh, I have to do it all by myself. And so, what kind of phrases can we use? Well, again, we have to start with the modeling piece and say, oh, Miss Julie tried to do this. She can't get it. I can't get this. I'm going to go ask Miss So-and-so for help, right? The modeling piece, everyone needs help. The more those messages in, your choice of children's storybooks, in your modeling and everything, then those set the stage. And then once you've set the stage, you can begin, as you say, to use some of those phrases. And they may be something as simple as a signal system. I know you don't like to ask for help, Caitlin, but I'm going to leave this card on your desk. And if you think you might need some help, just turn it over and I'll come over. Or, going by and saying to each or several of the children, how are you going on this? How can I help? And so you don't want to ask permission. How can I say this? You don't want to say, would you like my help? Because it's a yes/no question. And so yes/no questions have at least an equal chance of being no's, especially if they're fearful of making mistakes and appearing stupid. And so if it's an either or, that, can I help by doing this or doing that? What would you like? Would you like me to do this or do that? Then they might pick one. And it has to be very concrete to the situation. But, and of course the peer, sometimes you can, with the young ones, just somehow the peer helping can take the pressure off. Sometimes it can be a disaster. A little girl this morning in the preschool I was in, she was just bossing all those little boys around and it all ended in tears. So you have to be careful about who you choose. But I would say making it safe by modeling, asking everyone or lots of people, giving the forced choice, and the signal system. I think you have to try those different strategies out and see what works for that child.
Absolutely. So I'm looking here. Emily says thank you in the chat.
You're welcome. I know it can be a bit long-winded sometimes, but these are the kinds of questions we need to be asking.
Mm-hmm.
So empathy. Empathy is so important. Can you read that question, Caitlin?
Sure. Abigail asks, what are some options or examples of feedback that build empathy but steers away from people pleasing?
Mm-hmm. So in the book, in one of my other workshops, we talk about this teacher named Brett Turner out in California and some of the work he's done on empathy. is amazing. And whilst we have to be careful of that boundary, like I said earlier, we're not the counselor, we're not the psychologist, but we want to create a sense of empathy in our classroom, again, where everyone feels safe and comfortable. You know, that if you know your peers are empathetic, then you're going to feel very comfortable asking questions and making mistakes and taking risks. So can you teach empathy? Is it something you can teach? I'm not sure. But he has this great activity he does where he takes a red piece of tissue paper and he asks the children, he says, we're not going to share what it is, but I want you to think about something that someone said that hurt your feelings. And you pass it around and each child gives a little crumple. Now, sometimes you might want to have all the children have just one, each have their own and crumple it depending on the sort of the dynamic in your classroom. But the idea is that once it's gone around the classroom, or once everyone's crumpled their paper and they switch papers, you pull the paper out again and you say, when you think about people hurting your feelings and wanting to feel better, what is it that you see? And so you can see that the heart can be whole again, but the creases are still there. And so there's a few things children can take out of this. One is that, oh, everyone's had their feelings hurt. Sometimes when your feelings are being hurt in the classroom, you don't know, you think you're the only one. But once you realize that, oh, somebody has said something to everyone in this room that's been hurtful, that can hurt, that then builds that ability to talk about empathy and caring about your friends and your peers and your community. It's sort of the base of any social studies curriculum. When we think about the early stages and the personal responsibility, that has to come out of empathy. And it's not very easy to do that. And I think what I like, Abigail, about what you said is to steer away from people pleasing. This isn't about we want to make the teacher happy or we want to make someone happy. It's about we want to care for someone. And so there's a lot of things like the buddy benches and the lunch bunches and all kinds of different activities you can do with young ones to sort of help them, build a community that's based in empathy and in, why do we have rules? Just like the feedback that all of you put in the Jamboard, it's not just a rule that we use our walking feet or our inside voice. There's a reason why we do that. And so I think unpacking rules, teaching empathy directly, and of course, always moderating where you can. You're not the counselor, but you can moderate and give some phrases about, oh, I see Caitlin's crying. I wonder why she's crying. And have people say, and when Caitlin can use her words, make sure that Caitlin uses the right words to say, it hurt my feeling when you snatched my lunchbox or whatever it is. It's that it's more like coaching, I think, when you're a teacher than it is therapeutic. But yeah, I mean, those are some ideas, but I'd be happy to chat more if you want to contact me at some point, Abigail. But it's key to schools, communities, societies, empathy, right? That's where it all starts.
Definitely. Thank you, Julie. I'm looking here for some more questions. I don't see any more questions, but everyone, please feel free to, again, you can type your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature and you can come off mute and ask your question.
Absolutely. And I apologize for miscalculating how much time people would want to ask questions. You never know with a large audience if it's going to be a lot of people want to jump in or it's a bit too large for the more informal chat. So if anybody's still there and wants to come in and just unmute and chat, that's great. If you want to put some more things in the chat box, remember you can do that anonymously if that makes you feel more comfortable. But I'd love to have some more questions or even some ideas that we can use in our work. We're always looking for teachers who are doing fabulous work and being able to make those connections and partner if we can. Through the chat earlier. There's nothing in the Q&A, right?
Oh, we have a question about tips for use of picky eaters.
Picky eaters. Oh my goodness. And, you know, again, going back to our earlier piece, I feel that families are also in a place now where the toxic stress and the anxiety are really being manifested in these kinds of behaviors. Sometimes you might be a picky eater because it's texture, because you have a speech or tactile defensiveness, but sometimes it is actually a sign of anxiety. And so obviously the first rule that we always have is don't get into a battle, right? That's, you've got all these kids here and somebody's not eating their lunch, and you know, you just want to kind of say like, hurry up and go eat your lunch. And so it's starting out by avoiding the battle, and then always start with naming it. You know, I noticed that you didn't eat your fruit today, and leave it. And then I noticed that you didn't eat your fruit again today. Why is that? So you're just sort of slowly coming into that piece and trying to get an idea of why, you know, why this is so difficult, you know, and you can get a sense of if it's anxiety, you're going to need to bring someone in on that, right? If they, particularly for young ones, if they're already struggling with those kinds of issues, then you want to get them help as soon as possible. If it's tactile, food, swallowing, speech, you need a speech language therapist to get in there. And I think I had an interesting scene this summer where I had a group of children, a bunch of 5-year-olds, and you know how sometimes you have those wonderful boys who just bounce off the wall, and you know, it's so hard to manage them and you don't want to order them about and just fall back on the rules. But sometimes one of the rare instances where if it's not anxiety and it's not physiological, you may want to use some of the traditional behavioral things. I'm not usually a big fan of them, but it may work if you think it's just behavioral. But if there's an underlying need, I would go ahead and make sure that make sure that child has an evaluation. And if you think it's not either of those things, name it, set a goal, reward where you can. You know, it may take weeks and weeks. It may take 3, 4, 5 weeks to begin to get them to eat, you know, whatever your goal is, 2 bites or, you know, whatever you've worked on. So it's not an easy one. Oh, it says here, he can do it. Okay.
Yeah, Cynthia, she shared she's used things like I can taste it, I can lick it, and eating blank will make you big like dad or something like
Yep.
that.
I know. I'm not a fan of 3 more bites either. But yeah, I think it's a tricky one. Yeah, just try to find out why and go from there. I have a wonderful colleague here who works in early childhood with the parents, and sometimes it's a joint effort. You have to get the family engaged as well. But try to get an idea of why. Is it physiological or emotional? Sorry, couldn't be of greater help.
That's actually a great segue. Another question, Andrea asks, can you give suggestions to support parents at home to increase executive function strategies? Any resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So our navigational guide for Pirates of Pondering that goes with our children's books, there are 8 units, and at the end of each unit, there's a parent handout. And we do very simple games. And, you know, again, sometimes I feel silly speaking to an early childhood audience because I think they already know all of this, but, you know, the everything from Simon Says to what do you see in the clouds, right? I mean, it's all these kinds of activities that you want to give to parents so that they can help children to manage their little bodies and to know what a plan is, know what a goal is, know what it means to be organized. These are not easy concepts for children at this age. And so having the backup of parents at home is really important. But if you want to reach out to me directly, I will share some of those with you so you can, you know, adapt them or adopt them or whatever it might be. I'm quite happy to share those if you reach out to me.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to read Molly's question.
Yeah.
Molly asks, how do you suggest teaching a child how to control their body? He has been pushing and hitting other children and teachers. He seems to understand what is expected, but has a hard time executing that.
Yeah. This is one of the most difficult situations you can find yourself in the classroom, particularly with young children. You know, we had one student this past year and he was really trying everybody's patience, but you could see that he wanted to control himself, but it just felt like he couldn't inhibit those impulsive responses of hitting someone or snatching something or pushing someone when they got in his face. And as we all know, that there will always be 1 or 2 children in the classroom who decide that that's a really great thing, is to provoke this child who's having difficulty managing their body and their behaviors. And, you know, it's nothing new and exciting. It's frequent movement, informed decisions about pairings and groupings. It's games, you know, the Simon Says and the red light, green light, you know, just as much as you can. And, you know, the peace corner, whatever you call it in your classroom, you know, some kids really just need to lie on that beanbag cushion with that pretty picture book and just have that mindful moment. So you're teaching that throughout the classroom, but also you can suggest, oh, you know, it looks like you're having trouble sitting still or playing with the others. Why don't you have a little mindful moment in the peace corner, whatever it might be. It's hard work. These are some of the most difficult challenges because you want to help that child, but then there's some other child he's going to push or shove and might possibly hurt. Then you have to deal with the parents. And it's a really sticky situation. And you just have to be very, very creative about how you set up those systems. And signal systems and cues can work, but you have to get the child's attention first. You can't stand at the other end of the classroom and say, oh, it's time to, you know, go in the peace corner, or it's time to use your words, or whatever it might be. You're kind of running around a lot when you have a child like that in your classroom. So I do empathize with your situation. Just continue with those expectations, making the rules clear, why they're important, and lots of opportunities to move and use his words and take a mindful minute or two. Hope that's helpful, but if it isn't, just reach out to me and we can have a conversation around that, because sometimes it's the bouncing ideas off of each other that helps the most in those instances, because every child's different.
Molly wrote thank you in the chat.
Welcome. Anybody else? Ooh. Welcome, Cynthia.
I'm just checking the Q&A, seeing if there are any open questions. nothing so far. I think you've covered everything so far.
Okay. You're very welcome, Shelley, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm here, whatever you might need. Oh, I want you to put the evaluation link in the chat box. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunstan, or should I say Miss Julie?
Miss Julie.
We really do appreciate you lending your expertise for Wyoming, and much appreciated.